Hello and welcome to Two Mutables in a Pod. This is a podcast exploring all things taboo through the lens of spirituality, astrology and bloody life experience. For all of you who are well versed in astrology, this is all the good stuff in the 8th house. My name is Vivi.
My name is Emily.
And we are your hosts. Hello and welcome to episode 9. This episode is all about synastry, and it's a mini reflection, kind of like a check-in point as we are heading towards our 10th episode. So this is like the penultimate before that moment. So I thought we would talk about, well, what the bloody hell is synastry? I define synastry when we're talking about astrology as looking at two people's charts, two individual people's charts, and how they interact and how they might interface. Now, synastry could be between friends, romantic partners, parent-child, grandparent and child. I think there's really no limits or bounds to synastry and what you can or how you can run someone's chart. I think in kind of the pop astro or like social media astro, we often see synastry charts in relation to intimate relationships. And I hope that this episode will kind of give people a different perspective of what it's like to run a synastry chart for people who are friends, but also collaborators. When would you do a synastry reading? Do you know what? My first answer is becoming a parent. Like, I remember being sat after literally just being like cut open, my son was born, 10:00, whatever it was. By 20 past, I was running his chart and I was like, right, let me get into his chart. I need to know all about his information. Granted, I was like high on drugs, but I think getting to know your child or little humans that are around you, whether it's like nephews, nieces, cousins, is good to understand how you can be a guide or a role model in their life. So that's one area where I would absolutely run a synastry chart. Another would be, like I said, with Emily and I, like friendships and people who you are in close proximity to or collaborate with. I think that's a beautiful moment for you to kind of see where your minds meet, see how you can work together, how you can enhance each other's lives and like continue to grow together equally, but in your own kind of different ways and kind of specialties. And of course, intimate partners or people that you're getting to know and you feel the potential of something blossoming and you kind of want a bit of guidance, I guess, or support in how to navigate that.
But I think just like what you have said, it typically, when you spoke about social media, you spoke about like, wider debates on, in pop astro world or like on socials, it feels like it's strictly about relationships, but you've kind of broken it down that it's actually beyond that and it's a bit more broader than that. You can literally and honestly pull up a synastry chart for a range of things. And that's why it's so hard to like box it into specific things. But I think quite like yourself, I think even friendships, we don't really hear about people doing that in these wider discussions or like on social media. It's not sensationalized as much as relationships are.
No. And as you were talking, actually, I thought, obviously, we are collaborating in this space, but like, say, if we, in our respective businesses, were to hire somebody like a virtual assistant or like a personal assistant, like, I don't know if people talk about running the synastry of those kind of relationships, like a professional or working relationship, but that's another space where you could potentially run one for compatibility's sake.
It's really interesting because like this topic kind of leads into like electional astrology, which is basically like as an umbrella term looks at specific events in your lives and like, it kind of determines the likelihood of certain things going in your favor or like enhancing or utilizing the energies where the planets are aligned at that moment for the best results. And I think this is why when you were like, when when I read through this and I was like going through this topic on my own, I was like, you know what, this does then tie into the other parts of astrology that interlink. And as you mentioned, business partnerships, whether it's contractual work, whether it's people that you've hired on like an ongoing basis, I think there is a lot of room for business partnerships or relationships of a contractual nature, for people to do this.
I guess it's also worth like speaking on like some of the things that we would look at in a synastry reading. I mean,
Mhm.
there's so much that you can look at, so I won't cover them all. I think like the key things that stand out to me are obviously moon, your moon, you emotionally relate to one another or
Mhm.
emotionally maybe don't relate to one another. I think that's so
Yeah,
important when you're
the
working.
don't relate part. Sorry.
It's so
Oh.
important. But even like, not to like jump ahead, like I think about our moon signs quite a lot and how like we'll get like flavors of it like when we're speaking or interacting. I think it's such a key part because we also both have our moons within a stellium, a
Mhm.
cluster of energy. So it's important energy, I think, for both of us. Mercury, like the planet
Mhm.
communication, expression. I think it's so important to understand or to even just know why
Yes.
someone might be speaking or expressing in a certain way. Or I think when you understand someone's Mercury, you can kind of get a bit of distance and not take things so personally. If you
Yeah.
kind of think, well, maybe that's that person's Mercury that's kind of showing up here, and maybe that's just their way of speaking rather than wanting to cause offense, for example.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think those things are important. Just like following that path, thinking of like friendship and business kind of aspects. I think the angles are so important. Like so
Mm.
especially like the fourth and 10th
Mhm.
house, I or the IC and MC, I think are really important to kind of understand how two different chart energies might support those areas. I
Mhm.
think again for you and I, we have supportive energy in on that or both axes.
Do you know what took me aback is when you mentioned the angles, because it's not, you don't typically hear that
Yeah.
being something that you should look at or look for
Mm,
in a synastry chart reading as such. Like
mhm.
people focus on specific like planets, but the angles, as you mentioned, are very important things if you are looking at like wholesome but also longevity, so like friendships, business partnerships.
I'm so glad you said longevity because when I think of synastry readings and I think of what I would look at, the angles for me literally anchor the whole chart. Like I just
Mhm.
can't see a whole chart without looking at the angles
Mhm.
and the axis from the ascendant to descendant, the IC to MC feel really like they're pivotal cornerstones. And I think
Yeah.
if you start there with two different charts, that can give you so much information before you even get into the planets. There's obviously like other planets and like asteroids that I can speak about. Um, Obviously Venus, Mars in terms of relationships, I won't get too much into that.
Mhm.
But something that I was really reflecting on in terms of synastry, and I think because we have spoken about this again privately, I
Yes.
think it's quite beautiful understanding someone's Chiron and some of the wounding that someone might have because again maybe specific to our dynamic, there are moments where we're speaking and we're talking about our next steps, what's kind of happening and what is coming up emotionally for us. And
Mhm.
I think we understand us both having Chiron in our first house, what that means and what that looks like, but also how we express that quite differently. And I think
Yes.
in a synastry reading, all you're looking at effectively is how you relate to one another. And
Mhm.
I feel like for you and I, that's a point where we can relate, but also support one another. So if I was to
Yeah.
do a synastry reading on anyone else, I would love to know what's happening with the two people's chirons. Is there the potential that one can be counsel to the other, one can be cheerleader to the other? Yeah.
Okay. No, I like this. I like this. I think that you know what, you're mentioning the and I know again, Chiron is spoken about quite a lot in social spaces, but just even academically or just, in wider debates. But I think in synastry readings, I think how you've explained, is that person going to be the counsel? Is the other person going to be the cheerleader? But then also linking it back to how we, in our personal dynamics, are able to look at our Chiron in the first house, but we also express it and journey through it in different ways. I do think that ability to be counsel, then cheerleader, and if it's like going opposite directions, if it's supportive, does it need a bit more work, but you can get there, like, are things to definitely look at and assess.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said, I think, because what you just said about like maybe some areas might need a bit more work. I think sometimes when you initially see a synastry reading, you can be quite thrown by even your own personal chart. You can be thrown by the oppositions and the squares and think, oh my God, it's going to be like hectic and chaos. And yes, that might be true, but also because we have a fair few, don't we, between us?
Definitely. Oh yeah.
We have a fair few like squares and oppositions. It's about, like you said, how do you learn or move through that, or how can you see it from another perspective? Some of squares and oppositions, even in an individual chart, just require a bit more of your time and attention if you're willing and you want to commit to doing that. Whereas like your more harmonious aspects, so that would be your conjunctions, sextiles, trines, might be a bit more easier or a bit more effortless to kind of like navigate.
You know what? I think when we think about, the square, the opposition, and even to some extent the conjunction at times, I do think, but the first two, should I say, get the rap for it just being like a no-go zone. But as you've mentioned, even in our own synastry, like I was looking and I was like, oh my God, like there actually is there are a lot of squares. And I think we just, how I was saying to you today, the art of pivoting and being able, even in our own personal charts, the square doesn't mean, or the opposition, let me speak about the opposition because that's something that I have battled with quite a lot. It doesn't mean that you're never ever going to reach where you need to reach to. You just need to be able to balance the energies of both polarizing ends. And that's why I think it's not a complete write-off if you see this in a synastry chart. Some people might just be like, never go there. And don't get me wrong, I've got some placements and signs that I just, won't be experiencing again. But I will never sit here and say, no, it's a write-off just because it is a square or opposition. I definitely think that there's room to meet in the middle and there's room to learn from the polarizing energy or from the opposite end.
That was a word. That was a word. That balancing of polarizing energy.
Because that's what it really is. I say this as a full moon baby, somebody who lives with that sun moon opposite. I never really realized it when I, first started out in my astro journey. Like I was this jovial, like Gemini sun, as I've mentioned to you quite often. But it was only until like 2023 when I really realized and understood what it meant to have and live with that polarizing energy between the sun and the moon, like the push and the pull. You see the magnets that you learn in the science, it literally is that in real life. And I think, oftentimes people are just like, you'll find a way, but they don't really explain how you find that way. And I had to really sit down and break this down by myself, that in order to find a way, it's not that I have to abandon like my sun in order to get to the moon, or abandon my moon to, embody more of my sun traits or qualities. It means bringing both, like equipping myself with both from both ends and meeting in the middle. And I think that's why there's so much to learn from our sister signs. Even in as much as we might not realize that the opposite sign actually embodies more of the sign that, we might be like, ew, no, we actually don't do this like that. But it's just expressed in a different way. And that's why I think, equipping yourself with what the other side, because I think there's a lot to learn from that. And that's why I say, even with the square, it's like, it's not doom and gloom. Yes, you're going to see the red lines in the synastry chart when you pull it up, and it's going to be like, help, 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 alarm bells. But I don't think it's a cause for you to run and like abandon everything or abandon ship just because you've seen that. Very important to mention, because if you are starting out and you aren't quite familiar, and I've been there when I first started out, and I was like, what the hell is this? Like, why am I seeing so many red things? And it's like, it can put you off and you're just like, oh. And I do think these things have the capacity to affect your present day connections and relationships. If you don't manage the expectations, and I do think it's important to manage your expectations when you are even pulling a Synastry chart, it does point to the weaknesses and the strengths, but even with the weaknesses as such, it's more so a chance for you to learn from the other person. Now, I will say this disclaimer. I think Synastry charts tend to paint a picture, and I'm not going to romanticize this. I do like stuff to do with the past life, and I do like stuff to do with like the soul, but I think a Synastry chart for me, and how I've come to view this in my later years, is finishing a part of a story that is from a previous lifetime. Now, there might be certain indicators that are a bit more evident that, okay, cool, yeah, we're here to play out this script, and there are other indicators that aren't so prominent and obvious. But I think it really helps you to understand where you will benefit from having an open mind. Because we're not going to all be the same people. We're not all going to have the same thought processes. As Mimi's mentioned, like your Mercury could be in a completely different sign to another person. And it is the opportunity for you guys to meet in the middle. I will say that in saying, business partnerships and saying, working relationships, whether that's, collaborations, contractual work, I also think it is important to mention that the friendship aspect is a real thing too, which is what you said. And I think it's helpful to understand how your friend, like, you might have two friends who share, for example, the same moon sign, but they might process their emotional thoughts, or their thought process might be in completely different signs and in different aspects. And they might process these things. One might withdraw and one might be a bit more vocal, as you mentioned, counsel versus cheerleader. And I think that it's important that in friendships, I would say more so than relationships, to be honest. And I say this because I am quick to pull a chart for a relationship, but I will say in friendship, there's actually, we spoke about longevity and things lasting. And a lot of us, if you are in, sisterhood, girlhood, I think a lot of us aim to have friendships that last a long time. And I think in order to navigate the ups and downs that do come with these things, a Synastry chart may help you understand how your friend perhaps needs a bit more support in vocalizing how they feel about certain things. Because in their chart, it's a bit evident that, they actually withdraw at the instance of like pressing their emotions if something happened or triggered them. So I think that's an important or a helpful way to understand the energies of what's going on in a connection. And I would say in my own personal life, I kind of started out, I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. When I first pulled a Synastry chart, I just knew that this was something that I wanted to do. I had let's call it a love interest at the time. When I first pulled a Synastry chart, I was like, what the hell is this foreign language? Like, why are the planets on top of each other? Why can't I make sense of what's going on? And it was only until I, got into the mode of practicing and going over it again and again, did I understand the insights it was trying to deliver, the coded messages it was trying to deliver to me. Now, has this helped me navigate some of my personal, not just intimate, but also everyday relationships I've had with certain people? Yes, I would say so. I think that it's actually helped me more so in hindsight than when I've been in the present moment. That's one thing I will say. Not to discredit the fact that, I have pulled it whilst I'm in an experience, but I think once I've been out of that experience and time has lapsed, I've gone back and I've reassessed and I've been like, whoa, this actually stands out a bit for me. Like I see this a bit clearer. And I think that's the beauty of this. There is no time frame for you to assess a Synastry chart. I think it's something that you can assess ongoingly. Obviously, I would say with caution, because it might not be healthy to do it all the time. But I think if there's ever an experience that you're going through, be it a business relationship, friendship, or a personal relationship that's intimate, I think even if time has lapsed with that connection, I think there's so much to learn from going back to assess what the connection was about and the energies that surrounded it with the gift of hindsight.
I just have to pause there on that point, because I remember when we first connected and I said to you something along the lines of, I don't tend to check my partner's charts. Like I just don't. It's a practice I do now, but before I never used to. But what I did used to do was run it in retrospect.
Yeah.
And the power that can carry or hold, like seeing a person's chart that you're no longer in an entanglement with.
Yes.
Your personal healing I think is like an unspoken, hidden key, hidden gem, because I've had so many like light bulb moments seeing a synastry chart of previous partners after the relationship has ended.
Yeah.
And I've been able to have, with distance, a bit more compassion for myself,
Oh,
for
yeah.
the other person, but also understanding why our paths might have diverged. So I think that's like a hidden gem, being able to see a synastry chart once the contract has ended. Like,
Yeah, and I think, do you know what? You've actually like interweaving your own personal experiences, because I think, again, above everything else, we are people who like to, share what we've gone through, what we've journeyed through, and bring this into topics that we love to talk about. And I think the very fact that you have mentioned that, it provided a bit more, I want to say, clarity as to how you can extend grace to yourself and also be compassionate towards yourself. And I think that's also important in understanding that, yes, we have soul contracts that we've signed up to, but even if the experience has gone left, like, I do think these charts help you extend grace and compassion to yourself in retrospect or in hindsight. So yeah, I would definitely say that's one of the key insights that's helped me in like exploring. But I must admit here, in my conversations with Mimi, it's typically been with the intimate partnerships that I've assessed this with. Don't get me wrong, I also look at family, and that's something that I have done actually. I would say from about like 2022, 2023, I started, to gather the date of births of my family members, those that are still living and those who are no longer here, and just really assessing like what would the energy have been like, especially for those who passed before me even having a connection with them. Like, who are they, and like what are their placements? How do we meet in the middle? How do we merge? And what would our relationship have been like? Some might say that's a bit, whimsical, but for me, I think it also provides some sort of healing too. It can help you see the blind spots that you might not have seen whilst you were in the experience. It might help you extend compassion towards yourself. If you are in a really deep space where I call it the sunken space, where emotionally, mentally, physically, you are just down bad, struggling with your emotions, and like you are grieving that which was once there.
I love that. I guess like on the flip side, the kind of downsides of running someone's chart, especially like for me, it's like the downsides tend to come in twofold. So when you run someone's chart live and you're actually in a live relationship or live connection contract with the person, and you start to see things start to make sense, things that maybe the mind has tried to like dismiss or minimize, and then you're like, but it's in black and white in the chart though. Like you can't deny it because seeing it, and then the evidence is there in the chart. And like that can be a bit of a pitfall, because then it raises like a moral dilemma of, do I follow the heart here or do I follow stars here? It's kind of that journey or that dance of like free will and choice. And I think that it really brings about a moral and an ethical dilemma of, do I let this run its course or do I interject and intervene, knowing that this contract will end anyway because you've seen it in the chart? And I just, it's very, it's techie ground. I can't lie. It's really sketchy ground, but I've had, again, in the last few years, I've had examples of this where I've witnessed it in, the potential downfall or where we might clash. And I've seen it in a chart and I've been like, oh no, I'm just going to give the benefit of the doubt. And then it happens. As soon as I see it, it happens. And then I'm like, shit, there's the evidence for me.
Do you know what? You're spinning my mind. Like, I think I can actually feel a headache coming on, because when you mentioned free will versus choice, moral dilemmas, ethical, like, I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah, you've really, and sorry, I'm taken aback, because it's really true when you are, because it's the question that you ask yourself is, where do I go from here? And 9 times out of 10, you still continue with the experience anyway. Well, let me just speak for myself. But I think, You are right in terms of the pitfalls of it also, because I think it's caused me sleepless nights at times, running through placements again and again, looking at charts that I'm
Really?
like, no, I with certain individuals who I'm already on the line, like undecided about, and then I've gone to, and it's just taken me to a space where it's like, damn, at times, and that's why I say with caution. That's why in the beginning I said, if you are starting out and this is your first time and you're solely relying on this perhaps for like intimate relationships or partnerships, I would advise you to heed with caution. This is not to say not to go ahead with it, but like you said, it can put you in a space where you are weighing up the moral dilemmas, like, am I aborting shit? And it's like, or am I staying? And yeah, I just, the only thing I can liken this to is when you're going to a consultation, they tell you the person's not for you, and then it's like, where do you go from here? That's the only thing that I can liken that to, and it's a sticky one.
It is, and like when you were talking, I was seeing the tarot card, the Tower. The Tower card is actually for me quite a beautiful card because I think it gives you the option to jump before you're thrown. And the foundation is shaky anyway, it's gonna collapse anyway, but you have a choice whether you jump or you're thrown. If you jump, you have a safer landing. If you're thrown, you're gonna break a few bones. And I think that's what, sorry, Emily's face is growing big right now. I wish you guys could see the reaction. I'm trying to be so serious here, making this point. It's the same kind of energy when I see the tougher aspects of a Synastry chart, but you're already feeling that energy, and it's like when you witness it, you have that choice, but sometimes we as human beings select to not choose that choice. But what happens is that the pain can come tenfold because our guides, our ancestors, our chart revealed the information to us. And we've just been like, no, shut it down. Then it kind of may hurt a bit later, a bit more.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I think you said either be thrown from the tower or get pushed off, did you say?
You can either jump or be thrown.
And that's literally the moral. I think that sums up, not even on some philosophical shit, but this really sums up the moral dilemma that you can be faced with as one of the pitfalls in regards to this. Because as you mentioned, it's like, no, you've actually, no, I wish you guys could see my face. Like, I was just thinking about the scenarios and the experiences that I have also gone through, right? I was just like, it really made sense. Everything you were saying.
This might sound like a bit of a strange pitfall, but sometimes I've looked at another person's chart and maybe I've not experienced that energy yet. And I'll just kind of be like, well, that's not really presenting itself in that way. And I'm just like, well, okay, stay along for the ride. And that can kind of be a pro as in a helpful thing because it allows you more time in that engagement arrangement. But the pitfall also can be the length or the duration of time in which you are committed within that connection, if it's going to happen anyway. So I see that as a kind of helpful but also not so helpful thing.
In your personal experience, would you say to somebody listen, well, okay, there's two parts of this. In regards to yourself, would you prefer to just experience the individual and then just check the stuff out later in the Synastry chart? And then B, this is a bit personal, so let me know if it's a bit like, invading my privacy. But how have you navigated like a time where there has been that moral compass or moral dilemma in regards to something you see? And have you aborted ship with that?
Ooh, okay. So the first part, if you would have asked me this question a year ago, I wouldn't have been looking at charts prior that deeply. I might have just quickly glanced, but I wouldn't have paid it too much mind or attention. I was very pro this person has been brought to me, our lives have been brought together. Let's just be in it and let's just experience it.
Mm-hmm.
But now I've gone to the complete opposite end, and I need to know. I need to know your time of birth, your location, your date. I need to be running that chart because I don't want to waste time. I really do not want to waste time.
Yes.
I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have the capacity.
If you could see how serious Mimi is, look, I'm laughing, but I know.
And as for the second part, I did a reading for someone, and I actually had the reading for an intimate partner of mine, and I shared the details with them. And when I was doing their chart, I had this feeling of, that's not going to work for you. That's not going to be supportive to you. That's not really going to be great. I stayed. I stayed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stayed until they were the one that made the choice to leave me. And if I had acted on what I saw at the time rather than being all Neptunian about it and being very rose tinted glasses, wanting to see and feel the best in the person, not to say that they weren't a good person, they were ish. If I hadn't have gone into it from that perspective, and that is my Pisces side, it would have been a different outcome.
No, it's what you said about the Neptunian glasses, the rose tinted. I think it's very interesting, but thank you for sharing that.
Should we get on to our charts?
Yes, I mean, let's get on to the juicy parts. So one thing that I loved how you phrase this, like parts of our charts that blend together and complement each other. We both have our Jupiter placements in mutable signs. And the first thing that stood out to me was the very fact that yours was in Virgo and mine was in Sag. And I think this is where the learning experiences or the teacher in us comes through life's experiences, right? And I also thought, I was like, you know what? I think this is where our middle ground is, because as you mentioned, whilst it is a collaboration, it's also still a friendship. And I think one of the main reasons why, we even forged this path was because of our love for disseminating information, sharing that information widely, but then also, I think, learning from one another. And I think, not to go too hard into degree theory, but basically there is a astrologer and researcher. Let me just pull up his name so I'm making sure I'm saying this correctly. His name is Nikola Stojanovic, and he basically formulated the theory of the degrees, also widely known like in our day and age as the degree theory. And essentially each degree corresponds with a specific zodiac sign or embodies the traits and qualities of a specific zodiac sign. And it really hit me how we both have our Jupiter placements at 9 degrees. So I think this is always going to be the...
Wait, sorry. Pause for the cause. Oh my God.
Yes. 9 degrees.
That's so cool.
And that is a Sag degree. And this is why I think in as much as we are the students, because we are, the students alive and our experiences, we also are the teacher. And I think this is why when we do talk, it does come from I'm going to say this, I think it comes very deep, and it's our philosophy. It's deeply to us because we have learned through the experiences that we've journeyed through. But you have taught me things through some of the things that you've gone through. I have shared things, and in some ways and shape or form, you have learned certain things from me. But I really felt that in terms of our quest and our drive and our desire for knowledge, for the spirit, because essentially I do think Jupiter is that philosopher. Jupiter does speak to the faith that we do not see, the unseen faith. I think we both, in some shape or form, share this in very Sagittarian ways. And I think yours being in Virgo is very mercurial, so you're always going to be the storyteller.
Yeah.
And I always see you as that orator, if I'm saying that correctly, somebody who shares those things through the gift of telling you know, the gift of Mercury. And then I think I also meet you through like the the gift of discovery and journeying through travel. And like, I was really thinking about this. It's not that we both in these past year and a bit have traveled beyond the world, and we haven't. We've been, fixed to some locations, unfortunately. But we are going to be moving. We are going to be relocating. And God hears us. But I think it's crazy how we also have like traveled through different areas of life, but traveled through culture. This is where we meet. We are deeply passionate about tradition, which I think speaks to Sag and Jupiter. I think also the very fact that it is in a mutable sign, it's like, fine, yes, there is, I would say it's not like we're opposing. So it's not like my Jupiter's in Pisces. There is a square, but I think that square just speaks to different ends of the spectrum where we meet together. And I think different perspectives. Like there are certain things that you have different perspectives on. There's certain things that I have a different perspective on. But equally so, we always seem to find a way to meet in the middle. And I felt that was quite unique about one thing that stood out to me the most. And I was like, I really love this. The fact that we share this 9 degrees, that it's the never ending student teacher cycle. And I don't think that, even though we don't call ourselves gurus, like as I was listening to you speak, I was thinking, teacher, you are teaching, like you're very much, but you've gone through the tests and the trials, the unseen faith, having your faith being burnt, because Sag is a fire sign. Going through those trials, but still coming through with that mercurial wisdom. And I do think you do it with accuracy and precision, though. Like, and I always say this goes back to your qualifications that you have. I'm always in awe at the fact that you have gone through things, like you've got your stuff in order. Like, if anyone wants to say where your qualifications, you've got them to hand. And that's one thing that I think does speak to Virgo energy quite strongly. With your Jupiter in Virgo. And I think, that was something really cool that I had to point out.
I'm fascinated by that because, I've said this to you so many times that you are literally one of my favorite writers. And like, there's such a gravitational pull to your writing work.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because I feel the storytelling within you, with that Sag energy, your Jupiter as well. Like I feel that, and it's something that it's just a bodily response. It's a very visible connection, and I can sense that is that 9 degree that it comes from that, right? I just, when you were talking, it kind of was ringing in my mind. But also I love, and I think there's this mutual respect between us when we're thinking about philosophies or ways of thinking, learning, education, all that stuff, all that Sag stuff. And even if there might be like a different approach, there's just this point, like you said, where we meet. But there's like cyclical energy that I always feel of. There's no hierarchy. I'm learning from you, you're learning from me. And it's just a ping pong across the table. I'm like, we're on each other's level.
And I really, how you said there's no hierarchy? And I think that's really down to the fact that we, like, even if we don't consciously know this, subconsciously, we embody that student teacher energy. And I think because we will always be learning through life's experiences, there's no way, and especially in our dynamic anyway, it's never going to come across as like, oh, I'm higher than you and you know more than me. Because, like, and I always say this, it's like no conversation is ever the same with us. And I say this not because it sounds very cliche, maybe this should be our slogan, but I really generally believe that I come out wowed and I'm like, oh my gosh. And sometimes it's just a single emoji I can send because the words can't take me there. But I love that about us.
No, I really, really feel it. I really, really feel it.
This kind of stood out to me quite last minute, but I was like, I like this. Star is an asteroid. Now, it's not considered to be a planet, but Mimi's Vesta in Virgo sits in my first house, right? And Vesta, again, was this goddess, this Roman goddess. She protected the city and committed her life to, chastity, not engaging in, like, I would say, what's the word? Sexual
Fornication.
act, or fornication, deviance, and so forth. They guarded this city, and essentially, they were very passionate about this though, but they had a lot of purity in them because they weren't, they weren't fornicating, they weren't doing things that were like, not of. They weren't doing things of the flesh, basically. A lot of it was about cultivating the fire within, protecting, guarding, and being guardians, let me just use that word, of the city. Now, this was discovered in 1807, this asteroid. But when I think about this placement, that your Vesta is conjunct my Chiron, I find that it speaks to the healing conversations that we have, that you bring this soothing, this homely, and also counseling nature to the Chiron that sticks out like it's a very, I want to say, sore wound in my chart. And, that is to do with the first house. I can be very in my head about that Chiron, but I love how that placement, when I thought about it, the first thing that came to me was the healing nature of our dynamic. And in a lot of our conversations, I can go away feeling healed or restored. I might not have been physically, Mimi might not have placed hands on my body, or I would have been in her physical location. But through, I think you are a very passionate person, especially when it comes to women, especially when it comes to the underdog, when it comes to the underrepresented. I think you do champion those causes naturally through your chart, which we can, which we've discussed about. But when I thought about that being home to where my Mars and my Chiron is, and that being conjunct, it says here, she is the guardian of the home. She is the expression within. I feel like these are things that we can talk about, intimate parts of my life, without it being like, oh gosh, I feel like in some shape or form, I do feel safe. And I know that is, we have spoken about the other parts of where your chart brings that energy. But I think when I saw this aspect between your Vesta and then my Chiron, which is in Virgo, I feel like it makes a lot of sense how there's healing around the conversations we have, around things that go on in the mind, around things that go on with with the physical part of my world. Yeah, the first house does represent the self. I mean, I always say it's the first part of our chapter book of the story that we are here to enact in the world. And I think that a lot of the conversations to do with how one should show up in the world, even when you're telling me like, no, please can you, get this up and, take YouTube seriously and do X, Y, and Z. It's all about how I'm showing up in the world. Whilst the 10th house might speak to that, you spoke about how this is all an anchor, right? From the 1st to the 7th, the 4th to the 10th, it all anchors that part of our chart, well, our whole chart together. And I think I couldn't look at the first and, not think that without those conversations affecting the other areas of my chart or my angles. So I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, I'm you're right there.
It makes so much sense, but I'm just floored by the way that you just put that so beautifully and like really poetically. But if there's one thing about Emily, you will always bring the asteroids in, and I think that's something that I really learn a lot from you about, because I wasn't aware of that, and I wasn't aware, I had no idea you were going to talk about it. So I'm really wow, that's deep.
Thank you. No, I love the asteroids, and I really love the asteroids that represent, women, the goddesses. I think, and I do want to get a bit more into that study, and I often say that to you, that I think that's something that I can definitely see is calling me. But when I saw that, and it's literally in a tight conjunction, it's like right on top of my Chiron, and I was like, no, man, this definitely, and it does bring about healing. I feel that most conversations that we have, when we do talk about, you get it when I say I'm not into a certain thing and the world around me doesn't understand it, but you get it. And it's never stifling. It's never like, oh my gosh, you should come and do this. It's like, let me hear you out. How are you feeling about X, Y, and Z? And then it's like, no, but this is the gift that lives within you, and this is how you need to show up in the world with what you're here to do. And
I just wanted to add something that I realized yesterday, lying in bed, not looking at our charts, nothing. It just came to me. My sun sits in your 7th house and your sun sits in my 10th house. Yeah. Now, if that's not collaboration, contractual agreement. It screams of being able to assist and one another to shine in the most authentic way so that others can also benefit and reap the rewards from that. But also like the challenging or like morphing of how we see ourselves alongside how others see us, but how we see ourselves and how we put ourselves out there publicly. And like I was just like, oh my gosh, like we were always meant to have an agreement.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It was, there's no other way around it. It might on the surface be like, it could be potentially quite tense, or how can we like move or learn through one another, learn with one another. But actually, I think it's the way that we've had to navigate it quite authentically, the way that it kind of unraveled of us even starting a podcast.
Yeah.
I feel that has set the tone of how our 7th and our 10th house, again, both of them being on the angles, we're always going to kind of have that collaborative aspect.
You know, I love how you brought in the 7th and the 10th. And when you mentioned the 10th, it took me back to that part fortune, you know, the loss of fortune. Yeah. Now, this doesn't only just speak to success in monetary terms, but I think it can speak to the success in other ways. And I think success is subjective to each and every one of us. But I find that, as you've mentioned, that sun being on that, and then your son in my 7th house, there was always going to be that collaborative, supportive energy. And I think this is why it doesn't feel, and it's never felt like, there's no hierarchy in terms of knowledge, wisdom, and the facts that we share about our lives. But then there's also, it doesn't ever feel like, oh my gosh, this is competition. It feels supportive. And that part fortune and sun conjunction is like, yeah. And in the 7th house, you know, that's already home to Saturn for me, my descendant, my vertex. So it is a place where it's like, it's very intimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've got my Aquarius stellium there as well in my 7th.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of energy that we hold there. But actually going back to what you were saying about the 10th and your son, sorry, conjuncting my part fortune, this dynamic, this relationship, I think has been really pivotal in shaping the way that I view success. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the journey of us doing this podcast really helped me to shed some of the beliefs and the ideas and the attachment to social media, and just being like, fuck it. Like I know, or I can be secure in where I feel content and successful. And that is this space alongside the other things that I'm doing. But like this to me is like solid. And I think I just see that in that 10th house history that we have there. Impeccable scenes.
No, that, do you know what? Yeah, that's so sweet and like, oh, wholesome. Because I think the word that like I listened to everything you said, but that solidness, like solidifying how you feel in relation to, you know, the usage of social media. Because again, your part fortune is in Gemini, and I always say that Mercury energy, being that mercurial person, is always an innate energy that lives within you. But I think for this, you know, and it started off as a chat away in the DMs, and from that to where we are right now, like nearly reaching our 10th episode, and then still solidifying the foundation that no, this is actually what I want, navigating and interweaving a way through like the obstacles or the roadblocks or the mini golf course, as you can call it, what I like, what I dislike, what I'm willing to actually go through, and own personal relationship with how I view myself versus like the ways in which social media wanted me or made me feel like I had to show up in a particular way. And as you mentioned, back to your first definition, authenticity, how we both can authentically shine was something that, you know, stood out to me as you were explaining that. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like obviously there are, like, these are some of the complementary aspects that we've spoken about. And I think it would also be worth us speaking about aspects where we've really had to kind of learn from one another.
Yeah.
No, I've not even thought about it in an astro sense, but
Hmm.
I think one of the things that always stands out to me is we have a very same but different way of, I don't know how to even describe it. Like, to me, like, your Virgo energy comes through very strongly. You were the one that's like, let's get the notes up, and like there was a whole like structure, like behind the scenes we have notes, and we have, Emily has folders, and then on Google Drive there's folders, and everything's very like, everything has its place. And whilst I am like that in my like career and business,
Yeah.
I just didn't have that approach at all with this, and I very much came in being like, fuck it and see, like, let's just wing it. And I think that is typical for that Virgo Pisces sister sign
Yeah.
axis,
Hmm.
where the Virgo's like, let's lay roots, let's be a bit more methodical and structured. And the Pisces is like, we just want to swim the fuck around. Like, what?
Do you
What's
know
going
what? Oh,
on?
you are making me laugh because do you know what? I wrote about this in the next section, and I think it's the processes. And I really like, yes, I would honestly say the processes, because in as much as I am that person who will, as you mentioned, might lay, have things organized and so forth, I do find that there are points where I have to learn that, okay, cool, everything doesn't have to be by the
Mm,
book. Like, there was a part where we wanted to there was a part where we were dealing with how to go about one of the episodes that we are planning, which is exciting.
yeah.
And I was like, no, I need a script. I need to be able to message people this script. And you was like, Emily, like, just message them, inform it, like, just drop them a message. And I'm like, no, I need to know what I'm saying. Like, don't you think we should have? And you were just like, and then in that moment, I realized that, you know what? Sometimes you just need to go with the flow. Like, not everything needs to be pre-planned. Now,
Mm,
again, even when it came to the form, I was like, do you think we should have this written out thing? And then he was like, Ebony, like, we can just message the people, like voice note them. You were quite like, no, I just typically voice note my friends. It's like quite flowy. And I was like, you know what? And then I said to you how, with birthday invites, I'm quite like, this is the date, this is the time, a whole script, and like everyone knows the drill. So it was quite interesting to see. But like you mentioned, it really is that sister sign as like axis, sorry, I was about to say aspect, but it's an axis, where I do think Pisces is the unseen faith, going by the unseen, and it is, again, the typical traditional ruler is Jupiter, right? Jupiter does represent, I think, blind faith in the sense that, you don't have to actually see the facts, which Virgo might need to rationalize, whereas Pisces, again, even if, beneath the surface, they might be brewing, they might be drowning. I think for them, they're more likely to take the impulse of the spirit, whereas Virgo, which is in the mind, even though it is an earth sign,
yeah.
I'm speaking about myself more specifically, I'm going to have to sit back and think, does this make logical sense? Like, how can I do this? And like, have to look at the facts and the theory, where I'm learning how to just go with the flow, which is it's interesting. And it's been, to be honest, I do think it's been though a really good learning curve, into just taking things easy and not always having a plan.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting. But you know what? From that
Mhm.
example that you gave, something so beautiful was birthed in that moment, because we found a midpoint and we ended up creating a whole different form
Mhm.
based off of your idea, but then
Yeah.
also my collaboration in like how, what was going on in my mind, but also the, well, no, let's like flow the initial kind of part, and then we'll have like a second kind
Mhm.
of structure. Us being able to speak about that, I think we created such a beautiful template for us to use in a different way. And
Mhm.
I just think that's a perfect example of how sometimes these oppositions, or, well, it is an opposition for us, um, or squares can seem challenging, but once you actually kind of like thrash it out, you start to
Yeah.
learn, okay, where do I need to soften? Where do I need to relax here? Or where do I need to step it up? And where do I need to be a bit more boundaried or structured? And I
Mhm.
think if it wasn't for us having open, frank conversations, we wouldn't have got there.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the important thing about these
Yeah.
things, how you relate to people. Have
Mm-hmm.
those that don't be shy to have those conversations.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, like, again, guys, as Mimi's mentioned, but this is a lot of the behind the scenes. Even though we're starting small, there is still a lot of time, admin, and energy that goes on to the smooth running of things going behind the scenes. But I think even when it came down to, there was a time where I was like, I didn't know a thing about scheduled posts on Spotify. And I was just going on like systematically and like thinking, I didn't even know that function existed because I was doing it from my phone. And even
Yeah,
at that point when it was like, oh, Emily, like, in my back of my head, I should have been like, why did I not check the Lapio or the laptop? It was never
yeah.
a moment where it was like, oh my gosh, like, why didn't you do this? You was just like, no, this is how you do it. And this is what I mean. I think it's just this thing of, even when you are teaching, it's never to criticize, it's more to empower. Because that was something new that I learned that I didn't know in regards to scheduling of the post. I know it's a bit random, but I still think it's a I don't know, it's a way that was different because, like I said, I had a way of doing it via the phone, and that was the way that I initially started doing it. But then when we had that conversation, as you're mentioning, having those difficult conversations,
Yeah.
it was never coming from the perspective of, no, you did this wrong. And that's why, as you've mentioned, even if you are to look at a Synastry chart,
Mm,
you never know how the interaction will play out. And there's no timeline as to how these energies might play out. Certain areas of that chart might emphasize itself a bit more in a particular season, and then you might be on to the next chapter of that particular story that you're in. We have journeyed through different chapters and different areas of our
yeah.
charts combined together. I forgot to mention how, in terms of, and I guess this could be a point for the complementary and also the parts where we are learning from each other, is how our charts follow a story behind. Like, it's a chapter
Mhm.
behind. I forgot to mention this part, but it's just come up. But our charts are set up in the way that, Mimi will journey through something, and then that's like already chapter, let's just say chapter 5 in her life. I'm still at chapter 4 because my chart follows quite, closely behind her. But then we are able to meet in the middle of like chapter 4.5 and discuss what exactly we're journeying through, even with the pitfalls, even with the difficulties, even with the, I guess you can say, the harder conversations as well. I think that's where we're able to meet in the middle. Yeah.
Definitely. And I like that you said that, because even if I'm in chapter 5, I'm still journeying through chapter 5. That doesn't mean that I have all the answers. And it
Mhm.
very much means it's a work in progress. And I think that's how we're able to meet in the middle, because I'm
Yeah.
coming to you and I'm like, I'm a novice. I don't know. I'm still learning. I'm
Mhm.
still surrendering, opening myself up to healing.
Yeah.
But you're also in that space, but at, in chapter 4,
Yes.
how can I tell you about this, you support me,
Hmm.
but then I support you because we're learning in that process. It's such an
Hmm.
interesting interaction. And I think I only noticed it because you mentioned it to me when we were specifically speaking about Saturn. And you mentioned as well, just going back, about how we might be having like the behind the scenes stuff, which, by the way, Emily does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. Like, I think your mind just like just goes in the behind the scenes stuff. And I'm just like, okay, catching up here. But there was a point you mentioned about, I might not, you understand that I'm not saying it in a critical or to
Yes.
criticize you. And I think early on I had to learn that you're not criticizing me either.
Yeah.
And that comes from
Mhm.
so our your Sag house squares my Pisces house, like, just to keep
Mhm.
it in simple
Yes.
terms. And growing up, I've had quite challenging energies with Sag in my life and in relationships as well. And I think I had carried some of that. And I really had to understand through our conversation that you're not coming with that energy and you're not suggesting things to criticize. And I
Yeah.
really had to be like, oh, okay, there's a square there, but we can move through this. And again, that was the power of a conversation between us. And I was like, oh, okay, I can let that go.
Yes. Oh my god. Oh my gosh. And do you know what? And I think all of us, we've got experiences from, be it the home, friendships, whatever dynamic or personal relationship, that you've experienced this particular thing in. It's very, I think it is human nature of us to also, yes, we might do the healing work. Yes, we might, be in a better space, but we still carry parts of those scars with us. And then in our next connections, or the present connections that we're in, sometimes those things can trickle forth, and it's like, it might not, that conversation that we had regarding that specific thing, that was a trigger which took you back to a space where it was like, nah man, I'm not trying to go through this again. And I think that the ability, even like, your Mercury's in Pisces, there's no exact like aspect going on between our Mercuries. Your Mercury's in Pisces in the 8th house, my Mercury is in Gemini in the 10th house, and there's no direct aspect going on. But still, I find that we still will come from, or there still will be room for us to learn from one another through our processes, how we communicate, how we say things in particular ways. But you've also mentioned the Sag house. And I know, again, once we had that conversation, it was like, oh, okay, a sigh of relief. We can, we can move forward. And there was a time in which, a few months ago, I was like, no, like the delivery or the way certain things were said, I just didn't like that, And then we was like, no, it wasn't said this way. And, and this is what I say, even though you might have squares, even though you might have the oppositions, as you mentioned, the fundamental thing is the conversation that you can have openly. And I think being mutable and having that mutable energy in our chart actually allows us to even want to have that space, or that the opportunity to listen to one another and have that conversation, and B, to even listen to each other. So let me split that up. Being mutable, or having that mutable nature, allows us to create the room and the opportunity to even have the convo, because I think, it could very much be easy for other modalities, I'm not generalizing, to just be like, nope, I'm not trying to hear it. That's not where I'm at. But I think that being immutable does provide some sort of flexibility and adaptability, and be the conversation itself, even though it can be heavy. I find that, I don't know, did you know what? I'm going to sound poetic here, but it's almost as if that mutable watery nature of your Mercury and Pisces kind of like soothes the airy nature of my Gemini, like, Mercury, that can be in the mind quite a lot about how I say things. So I do think there is, I do think, to be honest, I do think I'm one to think about the words. I do think so, in my head anyway. Yes, yeah. And I think that sometimes I can get caught up in analyzing that, but I don't know if that's also because of my ascendant is ruled by Mercury too, where I'm thinking like, okay, sometimes I find that, and this has not just been in, like, I'm talking about previous dynamics, where I felt that I've had to think a lot in my head about how certain things are being said. So, when that conversation happened, I was like, no. Because in my head, I'm so used to thinking that I'm thinking about how I'm saying these words. But then when we had that conversation, like I said, that I think that water kind of, not that, water can smooth over air in that literal sense, but there was some sort of like stillness that was felt after we had that conversation.
I felt that as well. And I think I remember actually saying to you that I didn't want you to have to think about, and like almost like pre-package it to perfect it to then come to me. I'm like, no, fuck it, give me it in the rawest version. Like I just read it how it comes, like it's fine. Because like this is like, I think it was one of the episodes that kind of made it click for me. But it's one of the, like, your mercurial energy, but also your third house being Scorpio ruled, is something that I really, really learn a lot from in your
Mm-hmm.
delivery and your expression, especially when it is just like that, like when it's
Mm-hmm.
just off the cuff, because obviously there's the wit, there's the humor, that just gets me every time. But there's a tenaciousness, I think, that you are able to express your boundaries with.
Mm-hmm.
And my Pisces is like, we need to take notes, we need to take notes, we need to understand why we're not doing that. I
Oh my
really learn from that,
God.
from those parts of your chart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a beautiful thing for me to observe in you and
Yeah.
to learn from you in that aspect.
Oh, thank you. That's such a beautiful message, isn't it? Gosh, guys, as you're speaking, I do find, and like as I was going through our charts, I was like, you know what? Even though there are squares, there are a lot of supportive things that are going on there. For example, your moon, it trines my south node, you know, my Mars, it trines your north node. There's a lot of supportive aspects outside of the heavier ones where we are having to learn about our different working styles, our different processes, the ways in which, we have gone through, because we both have gone through things, to be honest, and we both still have those scars that we're healing with. Hence why I said the conversation about your Vesta being on my Chiron is very healing for me.
My last point, Venus is coming to play with that, I think, and our
Oh
Liliths,
my
I think,
gosh.
because I can't remember, you've mentioned this to me before, and when you said it, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I know that there's no judgment and that
Yes.
there is nothing that's off the table. And I
Mm-hmm.
do think both Venus and Lilith for us come into play there, because there's just this,
Oh
there's
my
such an
God.
openness, I think,
Yeah.
that happens within the
Mm-hmm.
formation of synastry that allows for that zero judgment to
Oh,
happen.
I really love the fact that you mentioned Lilith because I completely forgot to include that in that chart. But I think that's also one area where it's like, no, like I can tell you, I can tell you wild things, and even if they aren't wild, I can tell you things that I feel about, suppressed rage, or I can tell you things that I think is an injustice,
Mm,
and you will, even if it's not something that you've gone through personally, you will
mm,
still meet me in the middle. And this is why when you kind of asked us to look at this topic, initially I was like, there's so much to cover.
yeah.
But I found that as we've been speaking, we've been highlighting things that all interlink, and there's
Mm,
not one part that's a standalone area when you're
yeah.
looking at synastry. And I hope that, when people are listening into this episode, they too are able to not view those charts in isolation. I hope people are. It is a collective thing, and I think it's a wheel in the clog. Like, you have to look at it from a holistic perspective. And I think even in the work that we do, whether this with the podcast that we do, or even in our personal lives, I think we look at things quite holistically. And I think
Mm,
there is a lot of beauty because you tend to miss out on the parts that, yes, there are negative parts, and there are parts that you can work on, but there's also beauty in this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be pulling synastry charts, guys. There is beauty to be found in the midst of chaos. So, yeah.
amen. Amen.
I will say, I mean, it just came to me now. It just came to me now. In regards to what we have learned from each other, we initially had the conversation. I think this was around like editing. And this was like quite early on.
Mm.
And I was like, I mentioned something about, I think I spoke about the stuttering. Yeah, there we go. And I think, you know what, right? I think that also came from perhaps don't shoot me. But you know how you are literally as show up as you are, right? How you've been
Mhm.
saying. And I think for me, where my Mercury is retrograde, it is something I'm conscious of. Like, it's not that
Mm,
I stutter every single word, but I know that I have one. So I think in that moment when we were discussing that, perhaps that perfectionism from that Chiron in Virgo came in. But then when we had the conversation, I find myself now like just leaving it. Like, if I've messed up a word, I will leave it. And I think that's something that's a beauty of something that you've taught me. Because I think with the episode recording I did in the Christmas period, like a lot of the, I guess you can say, energy that was spent with trying to rectify like incorrect things that I was saying. Yeah. And I think now when I record, or like now when I edit, sorry, I'm not so fast. I'm like, okay, if it's there, it's there. Like, and I think that's something that you taught me, because for me as an individual, I'd be like, no, that can't stay. That has to go. That has to go. And it was like, no, like, why you, how I literally thought it was like, but why is there this need for us to like overly perform and overly like remove things when it's part of us?
But I appreciate that, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I think even like me showing up as I am is very intentional, because I don't want anyone to ever be in my presence and feel that they have to perform, or that they can't be who they are, or
Yeah.
that their imperfections are going to be judged, or like, you know, like I just,
Yeah.
that really bugs me. And maybe that's my Aquarian energy coming through. It grates on my soul to think that someone might be going through pain about just who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so like for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm glad that that was something that helped. But at the same time, I also learned in that moment that, okay, maybe I do need to look out or listen to certain things. And like, say if like one of us is talking and then the other one laughs, or I'm more mindful of those things, and I'm more aware. So again, we've kind of tried to meet in the middle.
In the middle. Yeah.
So I have a question for you before we ease into our hot seat question.
Ooh.
Have you ever looked at someone's chart and thought, you must be compatible in some way, and then it just didn't work out the way that you thought it would?
Yes, that has happened. Without spilling too much of the beans, I mean, so I use the app when I pull up a Synastry chart. I do use AstroSeek, but I use Time Passages
Yeah.
quite a lot for pulling up Synastry charts. And on Time Passages, this overall rating was 9. Like, girl, I'd never seen 9 before. I've seen 6, I've seen 7, sometimes 8, but 9, I was like, whoa. But in real life, I think despite all of the supportive energy, and you know, we've personally spoken about particular moon signs that we desire in romantic connections. And you know, this moon sign is that I desire. It's exactly that. But I find that I have the most challenging relatability with this individual. Now, it's not unworkable. There's moments in which we are able to meet in the middle and have those conversations, but you'd think that if it's rated a 9, it would be all smooth sailing. And in reality, it's played otherwise, and it's taught me, therefore I've understood that even if these databases, which they do a good job at compiling two charts together and like really analyzing them, honestly, that conversation that you had about free will and choice plays a big role. And I think to some extent, don't come for me, guys, I think it overrides, and it can override, the energies of a Synastry chart at times. So yes, even though it has been, on paper, a positive match, I've had the experience where it's been, I compare it to the squares and oppositions I've had with other people, despite there being harmonious aspects. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. I guess like just as a follow-up, kind of the hot seat question, say if someone was, the Synastry chart was showing like 2s or 3s and there's a lot more tension, what is your natural instinct? Is your instinct to run into the connection and just see how it plays out, do it for the plot, as my good sis would say? Shout out to my Virgo sis, who says do it for the plot. Or do you run away and think, nah, not today?
Do you know what? I've always said, one thing I've thought, and I've literally like fought with my Capricorn sun sis, I've always stood on the hill that I need to learn by my own experiences, even if I burn in the fire. And she's like, why do you want to burn in the fire? That's But even though I am nearing 30, I still stand on the hill that, okay, if I saw 2 I'd still have a lot of like in my head, I'll be running around tracks. Like there'll be bare tracks running around in my head thinking about it. But I think me being the individual that I am, I'm so split now because as you mentioned, it's like I don't have the capacity to go through certain things anymore. But I know on one heart, I am very like follow your heart. I am that kind of person. So if it was rated 2, I think on this occasion I'd like to decline. Perhaps if it was like 5 or 6. If it was like 5 or 6, I'd be like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna go in for the kill. But 2, girl, I've been You know what? You said something very valid. Like I think also when you've not been in this game, because it's not necessarily a game, but 2 is very for the most part, I am a person who would follow my heart, even if the synastry was alarming. I do believe that I need to experience it. But there's a quota. There's a quota for me. Yeah. There's a quota and I might experience it even, but I might not go with my whole heart, legs, hands and feet, you know? I might just put it in my hand. Then who knows? Maybe the feelings might catch me and I'll catch everything. Who knows? You know? But I think for the most part, it always starts off that way though. You say that you're never going to get too deep in it, and then you do get deep in it. But I want to say, yes, I follow my heart. I would go for it. If the synastry was, and I've had connections where the synastry, the synastry is like sirens, police alarm bells. But I've still had to experience that. Would I change it for the world? Some people. Would I change others? No.
What are you supposed to say? No, I wouldn't change it for the world.
No, there are some people I would change it for the world. But there are some connections that I needed to. Sorry, there are some connections that I would do it again. Yeah, I would actually do it again with certain individuals. So hopefully, I don't know if I really have done a poor job of answering these questions today, but they're so like, it's not black and white, which is why it's so hard for me to like give a hard line yes or no. Can I ask the flip to yourself, the reverse? Would you?
Sorry. Yeah, I paused because actually that made me really emotional. When you said there are some people that I would do it again for. I was like, you do.
No, there really are some people that I would do it again for.
No, that's making me really fragile.
Sorry. Oh
my
gosh. Can I ask the question in reverse to you?
Yeah.
If the synastry was so, if you happen to run a synastry chart and then the overall score that you got was quite low, are you the type of person to hit the hills and say, "See you later, mate," or would you give the connection a chance?
Yeah. So if I felt, I mean, I've been there recently, haven't I? If I felt that there was some sort of pull between me and the person, but the synastry was saying no, I would go for it. Like, I'm very much a feelings person. I'm very much a vibes person. So unfortunately, I have done that. And I've said to Emily, this person isn't my person. I can feel that this isn't my person. However, I also feel really pulled or drawn to this person. So that voice tends to be the louder one. And that's what gets me in hot bother.
Can I ask you a question? Okay, well, no, this is my last question.
Good then.
So, do you think that your Lilith placement has a role to play in following the impulse and the beat of your own drum? Yeah,
because like no matter what way I package it, and I think this is what surprises people when they get to know me, is that this part of my life I can be very rebellious. And I will just go fuck it and go on impulse. Like I just don't care. I don't.
No, do you know what, even though I'm laughing, I know that you're so really real here. Like you're not even sugarcoating it, that you're being real. But I think that's where we do relate that. And I think it might have gotten me into precarious situations that I won't divulge today. But that's why I said there are certain connections and certain things, synastry energies, should I say, that I would 100%, if I had to come back to this life again, I know that you're like, you'll not come back anymore. You've done your thing.
Finito. This is.
If I did have to come back, yeah, I think I would like to see. Let me leave it there. I don't want to play on the work today, but yeah, that's enough.
It sounded like you were about to name drop there. It's a bit dodgy ground. On that note, this has been a beautifully unexpected episode. So thank you. And Emily, I was about to call Emily what my son calls her, Emily. Is recording this in her birthday season. It's Gemini season. We are closing out the Saturn era, and we are into our 50s. So if you're listening, please give lots of love to Emily as she enters into her 30th chapter of life. We love you and happy Gemini season.
Thank you so much.
Please like, please subscribe, share, and we have set up a beautiful new Substack, and it's the same handle, Two Mutables in a Pod. And my favorite writer has hit the ground running, and she's put out 2 posts on there. Please check out Emily's work. She's poured her heart and spirit into it. So yeah, join our Substack if you are wanting more of Two Mutables in the Pod. So, okay. Until the next time, see you soon. Bye-bye.